All right, so welcome everybody. I know it seems a little odd to be talking about splitting the Red Sea. It feels like a class we should have had around Passover time, but we've kind of been working our way through key biblical stories. So here we are. This is about splitting of the Red Sea. Background information, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So this story starts out after Moses has gone to Pharaoh and said to let my people go over and over again. And Pharaoh keeps saying, okay, I'll let you go. And then changes his mind. And then there's another plague and we have the 10 plagues. And after the final plague of the death of the firstborn, Pharaoh's like, go, just take everything and go leave. They leave, they start marching away. And before they get very far, Pharaoh really regrets having sent them away. And this is what's happening at that point. So we will get started. All right. Sarah, would you like to read?
Now, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines.
Yep.
Although it was nearer, for God said, the people may have a change of heart when they see war and return to Egypt.
So the Philistines there are people that ends up being the enemies of the Jews for most of their biblical history. If you know the story of David and Goliath, Goliath was a Philistine, right? So there were lots of war with them. So God's figuring, I'm not going to take them by the Philistine land. They'll see war. They might get scared. They'll run back to Egypt. So I'm going to take them the long way. So God is taking them the long route, which is going to set up for this scene at the Red Sea. So what does Rashi say about this? So Rashi says, this verse says that God led the Israelites on a long route to make it more difficult for them to return to Egypt. But why would the Israelites possibly want to return to Egypt, right? There were slaves there for 210 years. It was not good. In order to answer the question, the Torah stresses when Pharaoh sent the people out. The Torah could have said when the Israelites left. So this suggests that there were some Israelites who didn't want to leave, and they only left because Pharaoh sent them away. The people felt that after the 10 plagues, Pharaoh would not continue to oppress them and he would let them live in peace. So there were some of them who were really having second thoughts about leaving. So God didn't lead them through the land of the Philistines because it was too close to Egypt. And God said, when the people see a war, they might regret leaving and return to Egypt. So that's why God's taking us on this long route. Hey, Jerry, glad you could join us. And here comes Darla. Okay, Aggie, you want to read us this?
Sure. So God let the people round about by way of the wilderness at the Sea of Reeds. Now the Israelites went up, armed out of the land of Egypt.
Okay, so they went armed. They've got weapons with them. So a funny thing about what it says here, the Sea of Reeds. Okay, the Sea of Reeds you probably have heard referred to as the Red Sea. In Hebrew, it's called Yam Suf, which literally means the Sea of Reeds. So does anybody know why we call the Sea of Reeds the Red Sea? It's a pretty funny answer. Christy, go ahead.
Are the reeds red?
That's a really good guess, but it's nothing as logical about that as that. So the map makers at the time used to write it as the Sea of Reeds. And somewhere along the line, somebody made a mistake in copying it and wrote the Sea of Reds, and then it became the Red Sea. It is nothing more than a big typo. So all your talk about the Red Sea, the water's not red, the reeds are not red, it was typo. It is called the Reed Sea because there were lots of reeds there. What?
I always thought the water was red like blood, and that's why they called it the Red Sea.
That would also make a lot more sense than the real story. We can have all these interpretations, absolutely. But that's how I understand it got to be called the Red Sea. All right, so God led people. This is from the Mechilta. It's another commentary. Whenever you see a blue screen instead of the white, it's commentary. It's not in the biblical book. God said, if I bring Israel into the land now, each will immediately take possession of his field or vineyard, and they'll neglect the Torah, which they haven't gotten yet, by the way. Rather, I'll take them around the desert for 40 years so that they should eat manna and drink the water of Miriam's well, and the Torah will be absorbed into their bodies. Thus, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai would say, the Torah was given to be expounded only to the eaters of manna. So this is really interesting, right? Because none of that has happened yet. The Torah hasn't been given yet. right? The Israelites didn't sin with the golden calf, and then they didn't, have the whole thing where the spies went in the 40 years that the punishment hadn't come. So basically this is saying God already had planned for them to spend 40 years in the desert. That maybe that punishment that came later was a pretext, that God really, really did plan on having them spend this time in the desert to absorb the Torah. But we'll save that for a discussion. We'll have another class. We'll talk about the spies. Darla, you want to read?
And Moses took with him the bones of Joseph, who had exacted an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will be sure to take notice of you. Then you shall carry up my bones from here with you. God went before them in a pillar of a cloud by day, to guide them along the way, and in a pillar of fire by night, to give them light, that they might travel day and night.
Okay, so I want you to kind of like try and get the picture here. This is when I think the movie The Ten Commandments is really good, because this is a multitude of people, right? If you think of the number of people who are leaving Egypt, they think it was about 1 million people. You got men and women and children and old people and their animals, and they've got lots of wealth they're leaving Egypt with. And on top of everything else, they're carrying the bones of Joseph. Joseph, who was the son of Jacob, had died in Egypt, and he made his descendants promise that they eventually take him out of there and bury him in the land of Egypt, in the land of Israel, sorry. So after 210 years, they've dug up his bones, and they're carrying that with them on their way. And what's in front of them? This pillar of cloud that they're following, so they know where to go during the day, and a pillar of fire at night to give them light so that they can travel. One interesting midrash I didn't put here, but an interpretation says that the pillar of cloud made the way easy to walk. It kind of flattened things out, so there weren't hills and ups and downs, and it made it really easy for them to walk. Jerry, would you like to read? Okay. Shraddha, do you want to read? Can you see it?
Sure. God said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp before, how do you say that?
Pi-hahiroth.
Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, before Baal,
Baal-zephon.
Baal-zephon, you shall encamp facing it by the sea. Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, they are astray in the land, and the wilderness has closed in on them. Then I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, that I may gain glory through Pharaoh and all his host. And the Egyptians shall know that I am God, and they did so.
So what does this have in common with the story of the 10 plagues? What's familiar here? Yes, Sarah.
Pharaoh's heart.
He's going to stiffen Pharaoh's heart.
Good. Okay, so we know ahead of time that God says that I'm going to stiffen Pharaoh's heart. And why? What's the reason God does this? Christy, what were you going to say?
Just that he's stiffening Pharaoh's heart so that he can gain glory through the Pharaoh, and the Egyptians know that he is God.
Good. So again, just like the plagues, the Egyptians are going to know that God is God, and God's causing this, right? And so Pharaoh doesn't all by himself come up with the idea of going after the Israelites. God is doing this because that God wants to finish off this miracle and make sure everybody knows who's boss. So what does Rashi say? It was reported to Pharaoh. Pharaoh sent officers with the Israelites when they left to just kind of check up them. And after 3 days, the Israelites didn't return. Now, why would Pharaoh think the Israelites were going to return after 3 days?
Maybe that they'd give up because it was too hard.
It's a good guess. Other ideas? If you remember the very first time Moses went to Pharaoh, he said, let my people go, that they may go serve you, that they may go serve God in the wilderness. They want to go into the wilderness for 3 days and pray, and then we'll come back. So the first many times with the plagues, Moses kept asking Pharaoh, let me go for 3 days. 3 days pass and they don't come back. And somehow Pharaoh finally realizes that they're not coming back. The officers tell Pharaoh on the 4th day. On the 5th and the 6th days, the Egyptians start pursuing the Israelites. And the night preceding the 7th day, they went down into the sea, which is what we're going to read about soon. In the morning of the 7th day, the Israelites recited the Song of the Sea, which we're going to get to. And therefore, we read the Song of the Sea on the 7th day. That is the 7th day of Passover. So very often on the night before the 7th day of Passover, we end up at my rabbi's house for dinner. He often invites us for that meal. And he always says, what was happening this night? And nobody ever remembers. And I go there every year on this. So I say, this is when the Israelites were crossing the Red Sea. So at the end of Passover, this is when this happened. Christy, do you want to read?
When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his courtiers had a change of heart about the people and said, what is this we have done, releasing Israel from our service? He ordered the chariot and took his force with him. He took 600 of his picked chariots and the rest of the chariots of Egypt, with officers in all of them. God stiffened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he gave chase to the Israelites, as the Israelites were departing defiantly.
Okay, so Pharaoh's not only going, but he's going with weapons and soldiers and chariots. And the Israelites are mostly on foot, right? They're on foot. They do have some animals. Maybe some of them are riding. And again, men, women, children, elderly people, they're not an army by any means. Melissa, you want to read? Are you able to read?
Yeah. And then I'm going to go get Vera.
Okay.
Okay. Exodus 14:9-10.
Yep.
The Egyptians gave chase to them, and all the chariot horses of Pharaoh, his riders, and his warriors overtook them in camp by the sea. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites caught sight of the Egyptians advancing upon them. Greatly frightened, the Israelites cried out to God.
Okay. So I want you to, this is a very visual story, right? I want you to be picturing this in your head, that they see the Red Sea in front of them, which is big, right? It's like an ocean. It's not something they can walk across. And they see all the Egyptian army behind them. Okay. And they cry out to God, which is good. Instead of just yelling at Moses, at least they're crying out to God. They recognize that God is where they're going to get help. What would be going through your head if that was you?
We're stuck.
We're stuck.
I'd be thinking about the punishment, if Pharaoh catches up with us, what's he going to do?
What's Pharaoh going to do?
Definitely contemplating jumping in the sea.
Jumping in the sea, jumping to your death, dying.
Yeah.
Aggie, any thoughts?
I was thinking about that too, that it doesn't matter what we would do, it's not going to turn out well.
So let's see what happens. Sarah, go ahead, please.
And they said to Moses, was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? It is not the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, let us be, and we will serve the Egyptians, for it is better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. But Moses said to the people, have no fear, stand by and witness the deliverance which God will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. God will battle for you. Hold your peace.
So they complained to Moses, which they do, by the way, through the 40 years in the desert. Every time things go really bad, they ask Moses, why'd you bring us out here to die? We'd be better off in Egypt, right? So every time things go wrong, they say that. But what does Moses say?
Have faith in God. Basically.
Have faith in God, right? They've just seen the 10 plagues. They've seen some pretty big miracles over the course of the last year. He says, have some faith. All right, here's what the commentary Mechilta says. So that when they're standing there at the edge of the camp, the Israelites broke up into 4 groups. They had 4 ideas about what they should do. Okay. So one says, like what Sarah said, let's jump into the sea. Better to drown than to return to Egypt. One group says, like what Darla was saying, let's return to Egypt. We'll be slaves again. We'll take whatever punishment that they're going to give us, but let's go back. A third group says, let's wage war, right? Moses just said that God was going to help them. Maybe they can win in a fight. And the fourth one says, let's pray. Okay, so you've got these four camps. I don't know which ones were bigger, if they were equally split, that they were saying, die, back to slavery, fight back, or pray. These are our four options. Okay, so Moses' comment, let's look back at what the comment was. Okay, he says, have no fear, stand by and witness the deliverance what God will work for you today. For the Egyptians who you see today, you won't see again, and God will battle. So Moses was responding to all four groups. How? Stand firm and God will save us. That was to the people who wanted to throw themselves into the sea. Don't jump in the sea, stay here. You may be seeing the Egyptians today, but you will never see them again. That was to the ones who wanted to go back to Egypt. We're not going back. God will fight for you. That's for the ones who wanted war. And you must remain silent for the ones who wanted to pray. That's always the interesting thing to me. Why wouldn't Moses want them to pray? Isn't that what they're supposed to do when something goes wrong, is pray to God? So we're going to see. We're going to see why that comes through. All right, Aggie.
And God said to Moses, why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward.
So God doesn't want prayer. He wants it to go forward. What's forward?
To do something.
What is in front of them?
The sea.
The
The
sea.
sea.
Go forward means go into the sea. They don't have boats. They have men and women and children and old people and animals. And the sea is in front of them. And Moses says, go forward.
Sometimes I think God sounds kind of sarcastic and funny. Like, why are you calling me? Just keep going.
Just
you
keep
know? Like,
going. Just keep
yeah,
going.
it's a big Red Sea.
But I can also imagine a parent saying this to the kid, right? The kid's trying to do something for the first time. I don't know, trying to ride a bike, doesn't think they can do it. And the parent's just like, pedal, just pedal. You can do it. I'm here, but just pedal. So what does the Mechilta say? The commentary says, this teaches that Moses was standing there praying. Even though Moses told the people not to pray, he's still standing there praying. And God said, this is no time to pray at length because Israel's in distress. And this has a really key notion of Judaism. Yes, we should pray to God, but we also have to take action. Okay, Christy, no problem. So it's not enough to just pray to God, right? If you get sick or your child gets sick, in Judaism, you don't just pray you'll get better. You go to the doctor, you get the medicine, you take the medicine, and then you can pray as well, right? If you break your leg, you don't say, well, I'm not going to go to the doctor and get it set because God's going to heal it. That is not a Jewish concept. You have to do something. If you want a job, you don't just pray for a job. You go to school, you apply for a job. You have to take action. So here, this is where we see this. You've got to take action.
It's very interesting. I've been watching some of the programs on TV about church. I don't even know why, but church and some of the history of the church. And that's exactly opposite of Judaism. It's about praying and God will take care of everything. You just sit back and you'll watch the miracles.
Right. That's not
And
a Jewish.
we are supposed to create the miracles.
Yes.
We're supposed to make that happen.
We still have to believe and we can still pray. That's good. But we also have to do. We can't just
Right.
wait around for attack.
Right.
Aggie, why don't you keep reading that last one? You was short.
And you lift up your rod and hold out your arm over the sea and split it so that the Israelites may march into the sea on dry ground. And I will stiffen the hearts of the Egyptians so that they go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his warriors, his chariots and his riders. Let the Egyptians know that I am God when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots and his riders. The messenger of God, who had been going ahead of the Israelite army, now moved and followed behind them. And the pillar of cloud shifted from in front of them and took up a place behind them.
Okay, so God says exactly what's going to happen. The sea is going to split. You're going to go across on dry land. The Egyptians are going to follow you, right? And then they're going to find out who God is. And then the cloud goes behind them. So the Egyptians behind them can't see what's going on. All of a sudden, it's the cloud is blocking the view between the Israelites and the Egyptians. So what does Rashi say? And the pillar of cloud moved away. When it became dark, the pillar of cloud delivered the camp to the pillar of fire. So the pillar of fire is now in front because they crossed the sea at night, by the way. The cloud didn't go away this night. Usually it went away and it goes behind them instead. It moved away and went behind the Israelites to make it dark for the Egyptians. Okay. Darla, keep going.
And it came between the army of the Egyptians and the army of Israel. Thus there was a cloud with the darkness, and it cast a spell upon the night, so that the one could not come near the other through the night. Then Moses held up his arm over the sea, and God drove back the sea with a strong east wind all that night, and turned the sea into dry ground. The waters were split.
Okay, so it's not just all of a sudden the water splits, right? Moses is holding up his staff, and all night long, God makes this wind blow, a very strong east wind, and that's what splits the ground, and then it makes it dry land. Okay, so actually, if you go back to the 10 Commandments, some of the 10 Commandments, that movie is terrible, but some of it actually is really good visuals, and this wind that they have when this sea is splitting, I think is good. Well, it's been a while since I saw it. So what does Rashi say? There was the cloud and darkness, and it illuminated the night. Pillar of cloud moved between the two camps to protect the Israelites from the Egyptians. We said that. It was now cloud and darkness for Egyptians. And the waters divided. So this is really cool. You ready for this? If you remember, if you did the session we did on the plagues, I told you that when the blood, the river turned to blood, the plague of blood in Egypt, like all the water in the cisterns and in your pots or whatever, it all turned to blood. So according to this, all the waters in the world, anywhere in the world, including in a cistern or a dish or a jar or a cup or a bowl, they all split at the time as the Red Sea is splitting, right? So you're in, what's going to be Germany, and all of a sudden your teacup is like splitting. That's why it says all the waters were divided. It doesn't say and the water was divided, but all the waters were divided. And so the heavenly waters were divided as well as the earthly. So that's like, if you kind of try and imagine this miracle, right? People do hear about the parting of the Red Sea, right? All over the world, this becomes a famous story. And they're like, oh yeah, I remember I was drinking tea and it split apart. Have you guys ever heard that one before? No. Okay. Somebody said something. What did you say?
Because I've never heard that before.
That's a great, I love that midrash. There's some more good ones. Shraddha, you want to read this one?
Sure. And the Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, and the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left.
So this is just like so cool to try and imagine this. There's a wall of water on each side of you. If you guys have ever been to, there's some aquariums I've been to where you like kind of walk through a tunnel and the aquarium's all around you. Have you seen those? So the water and the fish are there above you and they're on the side of you, sometimes even below you. It's always kind of always imagined it, right? You're walking straight through the water, but there are some great midrashim here. There's some great commentaries. All right, so here we go. This is from the Talmud. So the children went into the midst of the sea on dry ground. Each tribe was unwilling to be the first to enter the sea. Then sprang forward Nachshon ben Aminadav, and he descended first into the sea, and they all followed him. Okay, so the midrash goes, I guess I didn't put this whole thing here. The midrash goes that when Moses lifted up his staff, right, and the wind started to blow, the water didn't part right away. It waited and it waited and waited until Nachshon ben Aminadav, this one guy, had so much faith, he starts walking into the water. It comes up to his ankles, to his knees, to his stomach. The water still is not parted, but he has so much faith, he keeps walking. He keeps walking and walking and walking, and the water gets up to here just before his nose. The water splits. So again, it took people taking action. He had to have enough faith to go into the water for the sea to split. And then everybody follows it. So if they went into the sea, then why does it say on dry ground? And if they went in dry ground, why does it say they went into the midst of the sea? And that was, I did put this all here. See, this is the whole story I just told you. That's why, okay? And the daughters of Israel, they passed through the sea holding their children with their hands. And when they cried, they would stretch out their hands and pluck an apple or a pomegranate from the sea, which gave it to them. right? So you've got all these little kids. It takes a long time to cross the sea. It's very far. You got 100, million people. So the women, if they reached into the water, like with their hand, they could pull out fruit to feed their kids. Can you imagine this? Can you like see this? Yeah, it's pretty cool. And then there's more midrash about it. The Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, crossed the sea among 12 different paths separated by towers of water. Why would they need 12 paths?
12 tribes.
The 12 tribes. So each tribe, Levi and Yissachar and Manasseh and Ephraim, they each had their own path with water between them. So now try and conceptualize this. There are like 10 paths, dry paths between walls of water that they're walking across. Right? Each tribe had its private path, but you could see the other tribe. You could still see through the water to the other. Because crossing the sea was frightening, but being able to see them was comforting. So now we have a different visual of what the sea is, crossing the sea is like. Who's able to read and who's not? Aggie, go ahead.
The Egyptians came in pursuit after them into the sea, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and riders. At the morning watch, God looked down upon the Egyptian army from a pillar of fire and cloud, and threw the Egyptian army into panic. God locked the wheels of their chariots so that they moved forward with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelites, for God is fighting for them against Egypt."
So they go into the water. Their chariots get stuck in the mud, right, in the ground, and they get scared. Right? They get scared. They want to leave because they know that God is helping the Israelites. So according to,
it's interesting that it says that they're saying that God is on the Israelite side.
They said that several times during the plagues. They said to Pharaoh, enough. These people have power and God is doing this to us. We got to let them go. So it says that God removed the wheels from the chariots. Their wheels popped off. The wheels burned with fire. The chariots dragged. And those sitting in them were moved to and fro like a roller coaster or something. The limbs were wrenched. Okay. So years ago when I was teaching this at MJDS, I found this amazing documentary. It was so cool. And it showed excavations they had done in the Red Sea, and that they had found axles, like metal axles that had been, steel axles that have been used in the chariots. And they said this must be from crossing the Red Sea or whatever. I think I showed it 2 or 3 times, two or 3 years in a row. I thought it was the coolest thing. And then later I found out it was all a hoax. It was all debunked.
Oh.
And first of all, I felt bad about having showed it to the students, although they thought it was so cool, but I also felt a little disappointed because I was like so excited about this like proof. I should have known that if it really had happened, it would have been more widespread than this one video. But what can I tell you? All right, so what happens at this point? As the Egyptians are in the sea, the angels wanted to start praising God. They wanted to sing praising God. And God said to them, "My handiwork is drowning in the sea, and you wish to sing before me?" God does not let them sing. God does not let the angels rejoice, because those are still God's children who are dying. Even though God's making them die, even though they've done wrong, we don't sing and rejoice at the death of our enemies. And this is actually a very Jewish concept, right? So even when there have been times when Jews have had to go to war, if you think about the modern state of Israel, or you think about other times, we don't celebrate the deaths even of our enemies, right? Golda Meir is very famous for saying, was former prime minister of Israel who lived in Milwaukee for a while. She's very famous for saying that she could forgive the Arabs for killing her, the Jewish people, Jewish young people, like soldiers, children, but she could never forgive them for forcing Israelis to kill their children. Like she could never forgive that. It was this violence, so that we have to defend ourselves, but it's still not something we want to celebrate. All right, Darla, you up for this one?
Then God said to Moses, "Hold out your arm over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians and upon their chariots and upon their riders." Moses held his arm over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal state, and the Egyptians fled at its approach. But God hurled the Egyptians into the sea. The waters turned back and covered the chariots and the riders, Pharaoh's entire army that followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. But the Israelites had marched through the sea on dry ground. The waters formed a wall for them on their right and on their left. Thus God delivered Israel that day from the Egyptians. Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the shore of the sea. And when Israel saw the wondrous power which God had wielded against the Egyptians, the people feared God. They had faith in God and in God's servant Moses.
So is there anything about this description that seems strange? What happened to the soldiers? Darla, what did you read? What does it say happened to the soldiers? What happened to the army?
They all died.
They
Yeah,
all
they-
died. How did they die?
We must see.
In the sea, they drowned. And then where does it say in the second last line, where are they?
They're dead on the shore.
They're dead on the shore. So how does that happen? If they drowned in the middle of the Red Sea, right in the middle, because I've been walking down the middle of it, and now all of a sudden they're on the shore. It doesn't make sense, right?
God caused a big wave to move all of them onto the beach as a witness, as an understanding for everybody who was in charge.
Absolutely. Why? Why does God want the Israelites to see the dead soldiers?
Because that could have been us. And because God's hand is great and mighty, and we keep forgetting.
Okay. God is powerful. Could have been us if God gets mad at us. Any other reasons?
I think he's just showing the Israelites what he's done for them.
Here's what I did for you. Remember this miracle. Excellent. Okay. So there's another explanation. These are all good though. It says spewed it out. They spewed the Egyptians out on the shore so that the Israelites would not say, just as we are coming up this side, they're coming up on another side far from us and they'll pursue us. God wants to know the Israelites to know they're dead. The Egyptians are not coming for you ever again, right? Remember what God said to Moses, right? You'll never see the Egyptians again. God wants the Israelites to feel secure that this is over. All right, and now comes this very famous prayer that comes out of this section. And right after this, we hear what's called the Song of the Sea. Sarah, will you read this?
Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to God. They said, I will sing to God, for God has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver, God has hurled into the sea. God is my strength and might. God becomes my deliverance. This is my God, and I will enshrine God, the God of my father's house, and I will exalt God.
Okay, so this is what the Song of the Sea, which is called Shirat Hayam, this is what it looks like in the Torah. So most of the Torah does not look like this. Most of the Torah is just like if you were reading a book, it just goes across line by line by line by line. There are a couple places where the Torah is written very differently, and this is one. What do you think this is supposed to look like? And any Torah scroll you see anywhere in the world will be like this.
These are like the waves.
Like the waves. Excellent.
It looks like a sea in the middle, like
Mhm.
two banks on the sides.
Yeah. Or like the sea splitting, right? So you've got the water on this side and the water on this side and the dry land coming across. Any of those things, but this is somehow supposed to represent the sea. And let me see if I can annotate for a minute. Annotate. So if you see here, we're going to read a prayer in a minute. So just to show you where it is, this is Michamocha. So for those of you who know the prayer, Michamocha Bailim Adonai Michamocha Nedar Bakodesh. Nora Tehillah to Osefela. So that right in the middle of this Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, which is a much longer poem, we see that prayer, Michamocha, that is sung, twice a day during services. Okay. Erase that. So what's the commentary about this? What happens now? Moses and the men start singing this song. What question do you have?
How did they know the song?
How do they know the song, right? They didn't know this miracle was going to happen or how it was going to happen. How did the miracle happen? So the Talmud has an answer for us, okay? How did they create the song? So there are different opinions about this, like so many other things in Judaism. Rabbi Akiva says Moses saying, I will sing to God, and they responded, I will sing to God, right? It was a repeating thing. Moses said, for his triumph for gloriously, and they responded, I will sing to God. They keep saying, I will sing to God. They know that's their line. And so on with each verse, Moses would sing the verse and they would respond, I will sing to God. Rabbi Eliezer says, Moses said, I will sing to God, and they responded, I will sing to God. Moses said, for his triumph and gloriously, they repeated, so his triumph gloriously. So they just repeated exactly what Moses said. Rabbi Nehemiah says that Moses sang the opening words of the song, and after which they each sang it in their own. Like somehow miraculously, they all just knew the words. So, but it's kind of cool to imagine it. So I didn't give you the whole of the prayer, but this is the one I just showed you where it was. Who is like you, God, who is worshipped, who is among those who are worshipped, who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in splendor, working wonders. Okay. And again, we read this twice a day, every single day. It's part of our prayers. We always remember the parting of the Red Sea and how miraculous this is. We also, by the way, part of the morning service is reading, it has in the preliminary service, the reading of the entire poem, the entire Psalm of the Sea. Questions, comments about any of this so far? Okay. So, Aggie, read us this next part, please.
Then Miriam the prophet, Aaron's sister, picked up a hand drum, and all the women went out after her and danced with hand drums. And Miriam chanted for them, sing to God, for God has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver, God has hurled into the sea.
So her song is not as long, Miriam and the women, but it's longer than just what I showed you here. So Aaron's sister, who else's sister is Miriam?
Moses.
Moses' sister. So it's really interesting that it says Miriam, Aaron's sister, not focusing on her relationship to Moshe. Picks up, it says ham drum. Sometimes it's translated as timbrel, like a tambourine. Think like a tambourine. So all the women somehow take out these tambourines and they start singing. What question do you have?
Well, the women knew that there was going to be a party.
Where did they get these tambourines, right? They're just leaving Egypt. Where did they come from? And he's right, the commentaries tell us that they knew there was going to be a miracle. And so they packed these tambourines at the top of their luggage. Like they knew they were going to have something amazing to celebrate because their faith was so deep. So Miriam, the prophetess, Aaron's sister. When was she a prophet? Like, how do we know Miriam's a prophet? When she was known only as Aaron's sister, right? Before Moses was even born, that's when she became a prophet. Why? She said, my mother is destined to bear a son who will save Israel. Like she knew this before it even happened. With timbrels and dances, that's what you're saying, that they knew this miracle was coming, so they brought their timbrels. And Miriam called out to them. Moses said the song to the men and they answered him. Miriam said the song to the women and they too repeated it. So you've got the same repeating thing going on. And I think that is the end. This is like a record that I'm finishing the whole text earlier. What did you learn new? What was new to you about what we discussed with the parting of the sea? Nothing was new. You had heard all that before, the waters all parting everywhere in the world or reaching into the water to get the fruit, the 12 different paths. None of this was new?
For me, lots of it was new. I mean, when I think about this whole story, the Prince of Egypt is what's in my head. And so this is definitely way more details and a different perspective than the Prince of Egypt.
By the way, I actually have met, Aggie, do you know who consulted on the storyline for the Prince of Egypt? It was Everett Fox.
Are you serious?
Yeah, so I heard him speak once at Cage and he talked about
I'm
like
serious.
consulting with the movie to help, you know, with all these scenes and making sure they got it right. And it actually is really well done. And when the song, when they're crossing the Red Sea, that's an excerpt from the Song of the Sea. Those words that they're singing in Hebrew. It wasn't just random. So it's very well done for a Disney version of a story. But obviously there are more interpretations and there's always more. what lessons can we learn from the story of the splitting of the sea?
I think something that was we talk about it, I feel like, to be every time we talk about any of these stories, is the questioning. And it's really like a way throwback to my confirmation year, which all we learned about was questioning everything. And the balance of having faith in God but yet questioning everything, and still moving forward and all of those things. I also just wanted to comment that the splitting of all the waters is a new thing for me, and that I like that a lot. I think it's interesting.
I love that visual. It's very powerful to me.
Yeah.
Other ideas? What else can we learn from it?
I think about this story often because life is hard. Life is very, very hard. And I have noticed with myself, but with others also, and I think about using it often with others as well, that when things get really, really bad, it's like it's the end and nothing's going to happen and I'm going to die and I'm going to live in the street and I'm not going to have a job and my husband's going to leave me and all kinds of horrible stories. And then everything changes. And so I think we have to do our part. And I think that's, for me, the message. Don't sit back and whine. Get up and move. And the moving creates some sort of some kind of inertia. I don't know exactly, but something happens. I think when we move, we change the energy, we change the story, and we change others. And I think that that's, for me, it's been a life lesson over and over. Although I understand it, I have to tell it to myself and I have to remember it, or others have to remind me.
Because when things are at the worst, that's often when we feel the inertia and feel like doing nothing, right? Like it's not going to matter what I do, so why bother trying? But I think that you're right. This message is we have to put in the effort. Any other lessons you see from this?
Yeah, just keep trying, keep moving, and always have faith in God. He will always with us, and He will help whatever the circumstances are. So yeah. So I'm new to all this, but I really I learn a lot from this these classes, and I really appreciate the way you put all the presentations and everything. It's really helpful. Thank you so much.
I'm glad. Thank you. So here's another interesting question. It might be related to the lesson, but there are only a few key sections from the Torah that are repeated in our daily prayer, right? Like the Shema, which says that there's one God. That's from the book of Deuteronomy, and we say that twice a day. So that's in there. Trying to think what else besides Mi Chamocha. There are a few other. Oh, Matovu, right? Matovu is that'll be another class down the line, but what the Bilam, a non-Jewish prophet, said to the people of Israel, that's at the beginning of the morning prayer service. But there are only like 3 or 4 that I can think of verses from the Torah text. There's a lot of Psalms, but from the Torah text that are actually make it into the daily prayer book. And by the way, the 10 commandments are not in the prayer book. There was, when the prayer book was being put together, the rabbis actually kind of argued back and forth about whether to put the 10 commandments in. And ultimately they decided not to, because they were worried that if the 10 commandments became part of the prayer book, people would start to think those were the only commandments. Like they'd be so focused on the 10 commandments that they'd ignore the fact that there are 613 commandments, and they'd get too focused on that. So why do you think that Mi Chamocha, the prayer of the splitting of the sea, why does that make it? Why do we read every single day the story of crossing the Red Sea? Why is that more important to read every day than the giving of the 10 commandments, or of there is another section where it talks where Abraham sacrificing Isaac is also in the preliminary service. So that's another one. But why isn't it, I don't know, the story of Abraham having to go down to Egypt during the famine, or the story of Joseph becoming, the prince of Egypt and saving them from famine, or one of Joseph's dreams, or like there's so many other stories in the Torah. Why do you think this one, the Song of the Sea, makes it in the prayer book?
Isn't that what we do every day? We wake up and we have to move. And so we have to hear those words because it's hard. There are days I don't want to wake up because I know what's waiting for me. But
And we
maybe
need
I'm
more
wrong.
weather.
And so I have to wake up and I have to move.
It's great. It's great inspiration to keep moving. We shouldn't give up. I will say what's astounding to me when I read this story. They cross the Red Sea, and 6 weeks later, because they're already a week out of Egypt. So 6 weeks later is when they get to Mount Sinai and build the golden calf. I don't know how people can see the splitting of the Red Sea, the Egyptians drowning, and 6 weeks later have lost their faith so much in God that they build the golden calf.
It's that sand.
Yeah, blame it on the desert heat.
It shocks me every time. I find it astounding that they don't have more faith. But that will be one of the future classes we'll have that'll look at the giving of the 10 Commandments. I think that actually might be the next one, if I remember correctly. All right, yeah.
I was just going to say, Tippy, I think that could be a human nature discussion. I mean, we talk a lot about modern times, about that kind of stuff too. So
What have you done for me lately? Yeah. Yeah, we forget too quickly. But I mean, like in today's world, Aggie was saying when things are really terrible, then things turn around and they get better. I don't think a lot of times we don't recognize those as miracles, right? The small miracles in our lives, we just think, oh, well, I worked hard and I fixed it and I did it. And we don't see God's hand in it. But that's why you would think that these big demonstrated miracles that are so obviously supernatural that it would give you more faith. But maybe if they got so used to depending on that, they just expected more and more and more and bigger and better miracles and didn't have the patience.
Well, our prayers are loaded with a reminder that we have to appreciate every moment. At night when we go to sleep, in the morning when we wake up, like when I teach about the Shema, I always say like, oh my God, I'm awake, I'm back. Like I am really back. How could that be? I think that's a big portion of what Judaism is recognizing every single moment and how spectacular that is. And each moment that we have is a treasure. And do we use it as a treasure? Do we remember that?
And it really has a lot of tie-ins to mindfulness, right? Like taking the time to pay attention to this stuff that we could so easily take for granted. Melissa, were you going to say something?
I was about why you, sorry, getting out of my car and stuff like that. What you mentioned of why the prayer of the Song of the Sea is in the prayer book.
Yeah.
What came to my mind immediately was remembering. And I feel like when I read the Psalms and things that I learned about Judaism is a lot about remembering and how remembering like builds gratitude, builds faith, like that kind of stuff. And so I'd wonder.
We lost her. Melissa, we lost you for a second, but I think that you were right. I think it has a lot to do with remembering. In the prayer we say to bring in Shabbat on Friday nights, the Kiddush, which we say over wine, we say Zecher Litziat Mitzrayim, to remember going out of Egypt. And we say that a lot in a lot of different prayers. So going out of Egypt is a memory, but this also is a memory. Once we got out, that we took action and God took action to make sure that we really were able to get free and then get the Torah. Yeah. So I think that memory, that communal memory is a really important part of Judaism. And I think it's a really important part of why Judaism has survived, right? Because I think that we are the only people, or one of the only people, to have gotten exiled from our land, but then held on to our nationhood, right? To be 2,000 years of the diaspora and not in the land of Israel and keep being the Jewish people. That's an unusual thing, right? Usually if people leave their country, as a whole nation leaves their country, they disappear. So, all right. Well, I want to thank everybody for your time and for your thoughts and your discussion. And it's always wonderful being with you, and see you at our next Lunch and Learn in July.
And it's always wonderful to be with you.
Yes, it is.
Thank you
so much,
Tiffy.
Zippy.
So good.
No problem. Enjoy your summer.